By the way, it's pretty darn cold last night and today. I find this robe very warming when it gets cold, so I'm not wearing it to appear a certain way, which I assume certain numbers of people might presume or assume. I made it myself, by the way. I sewed it up about 20 years ago. It's made out of hemp, made out of twill hemp. It's very comfortable. I have a link below, and I also posted it in the community. One of the questions that I get asked perpetually, and there are countless books out there that try to explain this, and they fail at it. Or they'll partially succeed, but they'll obfuscate. There's a great word, obfuscation. It's kind of like a magician does, except maybe worse, where you like come up to someone and you throw some glitter in their eyes and you you confuse the hell out of things, and you say a lot, but you've actually communicated nothing, because it's like, I know he said a lot, and I just read a lot, but I still don't know what's going on. Regarding mind and consciousness and mentation. By mentation, we mean the process of thinking and cogitating, where you're burning the wood between your ears, if you will. And I could use a radio analogy. Of course, we can't take the radio analogy too far, but I have a 9-page article, and if I actually spaced it out, it would be like a 25-page article. I always put my articles in small pitch font and with very small borders, so I have that link below. First, I'd actually like to go after modern people that want to deny the soul in original sutta, and they'll always use this passage from Samyutta Nikaya 2.94, because we can debate the soul without actually talking about the soul, because there's 17 proprietary declarations about the chitta. Chitta is the Pali word which basically means nous. In English, you would say spiritus sanctum. Yeah, it's the basis for nirvana. Suvimutta chittasanabandham. The thoroughly liberated chitta means nirvana. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Now that's not from Buddhism, which means the subjugation of the perturbations of the chitta means yoga, the practice of yoga. It also too means the fulfillment of yoga. And yoga is almost identical in English. It means yukta, it means to yoke to. It means you're yoking to transcendence and liberation. But what is potential is not actual. And they'll quote this passage from Samyutta Nikaya 2.94, and it goes, Chittapi itapi, mana itapi, vinyanam itapi. And in translation that means, here being the mind or the chitta, really means spirit. We could say nous, okay, from the Greek. Here being the mind, here being mentation or cogitation. Remember, thinking, cogitation. Mana in Pali. Here being consciousness, empirical consciousness. And it relates these things, it puts them into one big lump. And these are 3 different words, and of course we have that in English too. Mind, mentation, and consciousness. It says, when I'll point out the 17 proprietary declarations about the chitta is that which is, quote, freed from the psychophysical. Rupa Vedana Sana Sankara. I mean, that says enough about as itself. Is the basis for liberation, is the subject which attains nirvana in doctrine. And I have, like I said, that list with book, and I have more citations than anybody's ever seen in this 9-page article. I mean, it is the most substantial and thorough article on mind, mentation, and consciousness in the original sutta, and the link below that I wrote. By the way, if you like that article, any donation is always warmly welcome, but it is a free download. But they'll actually quote this, and what the passage is this talking about mind, mentation, and consciousness in reference to the common fool. In other words, nothing is actualized. Yes? That would be like us talking about a static signal from, say, like a car's alternator or something else, where we're talking about general radio static in an analogy, where the signal and the perturbation, i.e. the frequency thereof, which would be kind of analogous to mentation, and consciousness, which would be analogous to the broadcast, because there's a distinction between the signal, which would be equatable to the nous, or the chitta, or the mind, the signal. And then, of course, the signal has a frequency. Yes, it has a wavelength. It has a modulation. It is perturbed, because nobody could point to a signal without perturbation, because it would have no frequency, and it would be completely untunable. Think about that for a second. Pause this video, if you will. Think about a signal that has no modulation. It's not a signal at all. It has no manifest ability to be tunable. And I used to be a ham radio operator. I don't really do it anymore. I still kind of do a little bit, but there's no radio on this earth that could tune an unmodulated signal, because it's not really a signal as we conceive it. And consciousness, of course, would be the broadcast, which is the interpolation of the signal and its resultant modulation as processed by the radio with its resistors and capacitors and analog digital converters. You know, how well the signal is tuned by the antenna with its resultant SNR, signal-to-noise ratio. It's really a pretty darn good analogy. In understanding the metaphysics of mind, nous, we could say chitta. In Pali, the Greek nous, chitta, or spiritus sanctum in Latin. Doesn't matter, they're all referring to the same thing. Mentation, that's not hard to understand. Cogitation, burning the wood between your ears, thinking. You're modulating, you're thinking about something, or you're creating something. That's perfectly understandable. Consciousness. Consciousness, of course, is this consubstantial. Goes no further, like the broadcast goes no further than the radio. Not the signal, okay? The signal is out here and everywhere in the ether, right? Because the signal is an ether modulation, which is what a frequency is. Any field modality, of course, is a ether perturbation modality, in this case EMR, electromagnetic radiation, with a given frequency, okay? Right? The broadcast goes no further than the radio, because the broadcast is the interpolation of the signal. So here we have a very simple understanding of mind, or nous, or chitta, or spiritus sanctum, mentation, or modulation, which would be akin to frequency or wavelength, the disturbance of the signal. It's modulation, because within the carrier wave, meaning the frequency, because a wave is not a thing, of the carrier energy modulation, which has a resultant frequency or wavelength, we have the disturbance, which of course we like to tune in. It's like, I want to hear a disturbance about the weather, a signal modulation.
In the mid-60s, lows in the upper 40s. Saturday and Saturday night.
Here I'm listening to 162.400 megahertz NOAA weather radio. I'm listening to a disturbance of the signal, but the broadcast itself goes no further than the radio. I think I've taken that analogy, made it kind of perfectly clear. And this will give you a far better understanding of the distinction between mind, mentation, and consciousness in actual metaphysics. It's hyperlogical, it's rational, it is all completely supported in a doctrine, of which my 9-page article has hundreds, literally, my 9-page article with a very small pitch point font contains hundreds of citations. You can look any of them up you want. They're Roman indexing, by the way, or PTS indexing, as you call them, Polytext Society indexing. But the soul-denying nihilists, what they'll say is, well, it says here, chitapi, itapi, manna, itapi. It's conflating these things as one. And when you have the mind, or the mentation, and the consciousness of a common patujana, patujana is a Pali word which basically means, your common rack and rabble, your lowest common denominator person that is impelled by their senses. Their will is completely reactive like an animal. When you actually have I call it a monkey mind too, is an old mention, monkey mind. And it was just completely reactionary. When you have an unenlightened, completely, just the lowest common denominator, then these things are all one and the same, and that's what this passage is talking about. But they'll use this to attack and support their unsupportable no-soul position. And so it says right here, chittam itapi, mana itapi, vinyanam itapi, saying, mind, mentation, and consciousness. It's lumping it all together in this passage. And that is the case, and this is where we actually have to understand potential versus actual, An acorn, you can't get any lumber out of an acorn, right? But an acorn is 100% genetically identical in its DNA to the freaking oak tree, right? Well, what's the distinction between an oak tree and an acorn? They're genetically identical. Yeah, they are one and the same essa, or substance. Well, one is potential and the other one is actualized. You know, it took 100 years to get that giant oak tree, and you know, it's got 1,000 board feet of lumber in it, for example, and it took God knows how many decades to get that big. It's the actualization. It had to survive to get that big. All of these things had to be in place. So what are we talking about in liberation? See, there's not a distinction, I mean a bone of contention within this. It's that these people don't understand the actual versus the potential. These people assume that they're interchangeable and they're one and the same thing, based on this one passage only, which I think repeats itself 2 or 3 times in Sutta. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3. I used to remember that. It's 2 or 3. But it doesn't support the position that they think it supports. You know? We could have 2 people, for example, that have like 10 acres of land, and say they both got $1 million of gold, you know, 1,000 feet deep underground on their land. Well, you know, the one guy's, you know, eating potato chips and watching reruns of Ren and Stimpy, and the other guy's got the pickaxe out and, you know, has built himself a little gold mine, and, you know, after 10 years of digging, he's now super duper rich, and he buys himself a Lamborghini and a giant mansion. The other guy's still watching Ren and Stimpy episodes and eating potato chips and popcorn, right? So, well, they're both one and the same. Well, they are if we examine it superficially. And this is the distinction between what is potential and what is actual. Actualization is, of course, as meant liberation. There is no distinction when we're talking about the mind, mentation, and consciousness of a common patujana. It even sounds like you're spitting when you say that ancient Pali word, patujana. It just means a common dolt, a common, I'm going to use a Russian word now, durak, a common durak, you know. A common slumgolian. It's kind of a funny term I heard once, a slumgolian. Kind of just, you know, someone with an animal mind, of which there is plenty enough in this world. And, you know, this world is a lot of suffering, of course, but to rise above it, like the lotus rising above the muck and mire of the pond, for example, you know, what is potential must be actualized. So I hope you actually liked the article that I wrote for you, because it is citation filled. I mean, it's just ripe with citations. It's just never seen anything like it. I'm proud of the article. I wrote it. It's copyright, but you're free to use it anywhere you want. Just make sure you cite the person that wrote it and did the translation to the ancient Pali, because that ain't easy, translating ancient Pali, especially the really archaic ancient Pali, like from the Sutta Udana Irivutaka, or the Sagatavagga Pali, the Samyutta Nikaya. Those are some of the really, really old archaic passages. But I wanted to, you know, just make that distinction between mind, mentation, and consciousness. These are not, now in English, we don't really distinguish. You know, mind and consciousness and thought, by connotation and denotation in the English language, which is not really a metaphysical language, even though English is very elaborate, doesn't have a strong metaphysical background, foundation behind it. And these are all conflated as like the squishy piece between our ears of the brain. Mind, mentation, and consciousness, all right, is that little squishy piece between your ears. And this creates problems for the English-speaking world in understanding these principles in ancient metaphysics, whether they be Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, original Buddhism, Platonism, Neoplatonism. They don't get it. And I know why they don't get it. And I've got an enormous amount of these books that talk about mind and consciousness and so forth in metaphysics, ancient metaphysics, original, true metaphysics, and you know, it's a lot of lip-flapping, jabbering, and it confuses people. And that's why I love the radio analogy so well, because it is extremely apropos to describing things. And you need to think in terms of modulation. Wasn't Nikola Tesla said, if humans would think in terms of frequency and if human beings would think in terms of frequency, and what was the other word? They would understand the world. And of course Nikola Tesla was right. But the signal, and the signal has a resultant, i.e. the carrier wave, and I hate to say wave because a wave is not a thing. We're talking about transverse electrical magnetic, this coaxial circuit. There's this energy circuit. We call it light, radio. Light and radio and gamma radiation, X-rays, all the exact same stuff. They're only distinguished by their frequency and their therefore resultant power. But that modulation would be akin to, of course, mentation. So we're talking about an intelligent signal, which is capable of perturbation. And if it's capable of perturbation, then that means it is capable to be tuned. And if it's tunable, it's not necessarily captured like you caught a bird in a net. But the nature of that ignorant signal, which it is ignorant, because if it is tunable, it is modulated. And if it's modulated, it is ignorant. And therefore, as tuned, just imagine this radio as alive, looking in the mirror and, identifying with the hands and feet and all the rest of it. It sees itself as that which it is not, the psychophysical temporal creature that brushes its teeth in the mirror every morning. Yes, it's modulated. There's a ancient Pali passage from the Dhammapada in the Pali where it says something to the effect, and I'm sorry I don't remember the entire passage in precise accuracy, even though I've got thousands of passages in my head. It says, the ridge pole has been broken, i.e. avijja, the support pole for manifestation and transmigration. Mara, meaning the evil one, cannot find him, meaning the liberated one, because there is no modulation. There's nothing by which it can be found. It's exactly akin to a signal without modulation, which is not really a signal by definition, is untunable. The only reason any radio on Earth, I don't know if you ever thought about this fact, I do, in thinking of these simple analogies to explain metaphysics, the only reason any radio is able to tune any signal of any frequency is that it is modulation. It could be upper sideband modulation, lower sideband, it could be frequency modulation, it could be amplitude modulation, but the signal is modulated, and if it's modulated, then it is tunable. But the unmodulated signal is perfectly analogous to liberation. It is untunable. And if it's untunable, then it cannot be manifest. There is nothing by which it can be tuned. And we speak in a generalized sense with quotation marks, because it's captured. Because it is never truly captured. There's not little people inside the TV set. It's not like a TV set when you turn it on, it's capturing little people. Of course not. But it is tuning in a frequency. And of course, that's all a TV set is anyways, a band of scanning frequencies that, makes seeming reality, of course it's not reality at all, manifest people and faces and things and all sorts of creatures, and, just like this fake fireplace, it's completely unreal. We have a frequency and a modulation which is tunable, but this tunable modulation, or signal in the case of a living being, is sentient. And it is sentient before it is embodied, and it is sentient after it is embodied. People say, how is that possible? It's like, well, how are you walking around smelling flowers and, doing all sorts of acrobatic things when you're sitting there drooling on your pillow while you're in deep REM sleep? It's completely believable. You think you're really eating apples. You really think you're interacting with people. All your senses essentially are shut down, but there's a transcendental sense, of course. This is a sense that is active in the dream state. It's sort of the spirit or soul, becomes bored, while you're sitting there regenerating your bodily health and sleep. It creates its own universe, and it flops around and does all sorts of weird stuff, and you wake up and you go, oh God, that was a strange dream. Everybody seems to love the flying dream, though, where they're flying. Man, that was great. Man, I love the flying dream. Everybody loves the flying dream. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. I hope I simplified things, and thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.